Hello. Thank you, David and Amber, for those very kind words. The case I would like to share with everybody is personally one of the most interesting ones that I've worked in my fraud investigating career. It involved a dentist and their spouse. And sort of the background is the dentist was working as an associate with another practice and married a CPA. The CPA also had a small personal accounting practice on the side, as well as worked as a CFO for some other businesses. After about a year or so of marriage, the dentist left the practice she worked for and then started her own practice. And so at that point, they became not only man and wife, but business partners as well. So the background that they established for themselves in this business was that the spouse, the CPA, was in charge of the accounting records, as one might suspect, as well as preparing, delivering the deposits to the bank, and the expense side activity as well, paying the bills, accounting for all the monies coming in and coming out, and sort of oddly enough, maintained a duplicate set of every patient's records inside of QuickBooks. Could you change slides, please, Evan? And it was the handling of the expenses and the duplication of the patient records inside of the QuickBooks data that was one of the first red flags for the dentist. On top of that, the deposits, both in timing and in amount, didn't really make sense. And it was something that they noticed for a while, but didn't really say anything immediately, didn't raise the questions in a timely fashion, other than just kind of quietly thinking to themselves. The timing was scrambled and illogical of the deposits. The amount of money coming out of the business accounts to various other purposes kind of raised some red flags. And it was a particular transfer that was around $175,000 that kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back there. And that's when some personal investigating took place. And through that sort of personal investigation, a number of other bank accounts were discovered. And then from there, kind of the magnitude of the situation started to come into view. At which point, thank you, David, the marriage became sort of not sustainable, as well as the business partnership. And so at a critical juncture, Prosperident was brought in, and an investigation into the accounting, both for the revenue side and the expense side, took place. Fortunately, we were able to bring about a very positive outcome for our client, for the dentist, and the ex-spouse, the ex-business partner, and their activity kind of became known, and it was probably as good of an outcome in such a bad situation as one might hope for. The main takeaways here, and one of the reasons I chose this case to highlight, are going back to what Sonia said. You want to definitely trust your instincts. If something feels off, there's a good chance that it is off. And second, the concept of trust is really something that is fluid, and what I mean by that is it's something that has to constantly be reaffirmed. You can't just trust somebody at one point and then rely on that moving forward. And thirdly, office policies, procedures, internal controls, they need to be followed by everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a spouse, if you're a dentist, or really even if you're the owner.
Oh, thanks, Tony. That was really an interesting story. I know Pat Little, if you're available and you have your video ready, you had a couple questions for Tony about this case.
Sure. Great presentation, Tony. Very, very interesting case. And I really find this interesting because I talk about this a little bit when I lecture. And a lot of the participants consider this a little bit lighthearted. They kind of glance over at each other and smile. And I've even had dentists come up to me and say, well, my spouse gets everything anyway. So it's all just sort of a lighthearted type of thing. But in your case, this wasn't lighthearted for the doctor. And I was just wondering if the doctor ever discussed with you the emotional impact that this had and how it might have affected the practice.
That is a great question, and because that's oftentimes an overlooked aspect of these types of breach of trusts. And she did. This was a particularly hard time in their life, and the idea of the breach of trust and the fallout from that was discussed, and the impact really was immense because it was the depths of not only the deceit, but the quantity of money that was mishandled. It was so both sort of the quantity and the quality, if you will, of these schemes shook that person to their core. And I did my best to in having these conversations about the emotional aspect to remind them that it wasn't their fault. They really cannot blame themselves for this, and in trying to alleviate some of that blame, to kind of mitigate some of the emotional distress that they were under. And I really, the reason why this case was so interesting to me was that it gave me a chance, more so maybe than in other cases, to help someone begin the process of piecing back not only their life, but their emotional well-being, because this weighed heavily, and the outcome that we could bring about, I think, was really the end of that chapter and sort of the beginning of the next phase, and certainly encourage that person to do what was necessary to repair the damage wrought on them so that they can trust again. Because I know that, when you experience such a breach of trust, you might be hesitant to have another business partner or anything along those lines.